Now, the Genesis creation account was never intended to be a scientific explanation. It was written more to explain why God created man and what went wrong than to be a treatise on how he did it. Yet, with all of its elegant simplicity, it preempted modern scientists by some 3,000 years in its claim of a finite universe. Now you might ask, what about the age of the universe? Isn't that now the point of contention with modern science? Well, slowly but surely, man is catching up to that truth as well. The expansion factor of the universe, coupled with general relativity, has far-reaching implications. Now, looking back in time, cosmologists estimate that the universe is 15 to 16 billion years old. The Big Bang cosmology brings not just space and matter into existence, but time as well. Time is the fourth dimension. Now, how you see time depends on where you're viewing it from. Time is also affected by gravity. For example, a minute on the moon goes faster than a minute on the Earth, and a minute on the sun goes slower. Now, taking into account the expansion factor of the universe, every time the universe doubles, perception of time is cut in half. Now, when the universe was very small, near the beginning of time, it was doubling very rapidly. But as the universe gets bigger, the doubling gets exponentially longer. The rate of expansion quoted in the textbook, The Principles of Physical Cosmology, says that the expansion factor is roughly 10 to the 12th. Now, consider that the biblical creation account was dictated to Moses from God's perspective, not an earthbound perspective. Nuclear physicist Dr. Gerald Schroeder has calculated the duration of creation from the perspective of the singularity with rather surprising results. The calculations come out as follows. The first of the biblical days lasted 24 hours viewed from the beginning of time perspective, from God's perspective. But the duration from our perspective looking back, it was 8 billion years. Now the second day, from the Bible's perspective, lasted 24 hours. But from our perspective looking back, it lasted half of that previous day, 4 billion years. The third day also lasted half that previous day, 2 billion years. The fourth day, 1 billion years. The fifth day, 1/2 billion years. The sixth day, 1/4 billion years. Now, quite astonishingly, that's 15 3/4 billion years. You see, the more you understand modern physics and the relative nature of space-time, the more comfortable the Genesis account becomes. If there's no God, why is there something rather than nothing? That's a question that demands an answer. And in light of the evidence, we are left with only two options. Either nothing created something out of nothing, or else something supernatural created something out of nothing. Now, atheists will rarely admit that they believe in self-creation. They usually mask it with concepts such as chance creation or spontaneous generation. Yet, self-creation or spontaneous generation is analytically false. The law of non-contradiction is the foundation of formal logic. To say something is self-created is to assert that it's its own cause and its own effect. For this to be true, it would have to exist before it existed. It would have to be before it was. Now, what if Hamlet had said, to be and not to be? That is the question. Shakespeare's profundity is reduced to an absurdity. For the universe to have no cause, the universe would have to be and not be at the same time. Sadly, this is exactly what many atheists force themselves to accept in a variety of various disguises, such as spontaneous generation, or they ascribe magical creative powers to chance. Chance is not a thing. It cannot cause anything. It appears atheists prefer to sacrifice reason rather than face the inherent responsibility implied by the acknowledgement of a creator. Now, astronomer Robert Jastrow says, consider the enormity of this problem. Science has proven that the universe exploded into being in a certain moment. What cause produced this effect? Who or what put the matter and energy into the universe? Science cannot answer these questions. For the scientist who has lived by faith and power of reason, our story ends like a bad dream. We have scaled the mountains of ignorance. We're about to conquer its highest peak. We pull ourselves over the final rock, and we are greeted by a band of theologians who have been sitting there for centuries.
The evidence pointing to the God of the Bible is so compelling that it begs the question, why are so many scientists still atheists? Let's return to the cosmological argument for God's existence. Premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. How do atheists respond to this rock-solid argument, which is backed by mathematical and scientific evidence? The formal logic of the argument is sound, so to preserve the atheistic dogma, they must attack the two premises. Now, when they attack premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause, they attack reason itself. The law of causality, or cause and effect, is the founding principle of formal logic. In fact, science itself amounts to a search for cause and effect relationships. Or they can choose to attack premise 2, the universe began to exist, which is to attack the very best scientific evidence that we have. Astronomer Robert Jastrow, who is a professing agnostic, explains in his book God and the Astronomers. Theologians generally are delighted with the proof that the universe had a beginning, but astronomers are curiously upset. Their reactions provide an interesting demonstration of the response of the scientific mind. Supposedly a very objective mind. When evidence uncovered by science itself leads to a conflict with the articles of faith in our profession. It turns out that the scientist behaves the way the rest of us do when our beliefs are in conflict with the evidence. We become irritated. We pretend the conflict does not exist. Or we paper it over with meaningless phrases. Note the articles of faith that Jastrow mentions. Now, everyone knows that theists have religious beliefs, but what's often overlooked is that atheistic scientists also have religious beliefs. The modern atheist portrays himself as a defender of logic and science against the religious superstitions, yet quite astonishingly, he turns against his own professed attributes in order to preserve his faith in atheism. This is not following the evidence where it leads. It is pure vanity. It is a curious sort of mutiny. Atheism at the expense of reason and science. First, let's take a look at the devices used by atheist apologists in their war against reason. When the atheist attacks the law of causality, he undermines all logical discourse and scientific inquiry. Science is a search for causes. If the atheist succeeds in his mission to undermine premise 1, the collateral damage will destroy science itself. Curiously, they attempt to use science in destroying the possibility of science by appealing to quantum physics, specifically Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. German physicist Werner Heisenberg formulated the uncertainty principle while working at the Institute of Copenhagen, while he was working on the mathematical foundations for quantum mechanics. Now, simply put, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle states that it is impossible to know both the exact position and the exact velocity of an object at the same time. However, the effect is so tiny that it's only noticeable on a subatomic scale. The atheist argument basically amounts to, if causality at the subatomic realm isn't necessary, then perhaps causality of the entire universe isn't necessary either. The best-selling author of 12 books, including Coming of Age in the Milky Way, for which he was awarded an American Institute of Physics Prize and a nomination for the Pulitzer Prize, Timothy Ferris, makes the observation regarding quantum indeterminacy. Quantum indeterminacy may have nothing to do with human will, but as a matter of philosophical taste, there are good reasons to celebrate the return of chance to the fundamental affairs of the world. He celebrates the return of chance? Now isn't this curious? Here he speaks of good reasons for celebrating the return of chance, not good reasons to actually believe in chance. I'm forced to conclude that the celebration
is one of freedom from the strong scientific evidence pointing towards God. If one can force oneself to believe in the power of chance, then one has embraced irrationality and anything at all can be made true. As discussed previously, chance amounts to nothingness. It is not a cause of anything. When we speak of something like flipping a coin, we say we have a 50% chance of getting heads or tails. But no one in their right mind believes that a magical force called chance causes the coin to land on heads. Do they? If chance is really a cause, cows can fly. So basically, atheists are arguing that indeterminacy or uncertainty in the subatomic world amounts to effects that do not need causes. This is logically incoherent and completely fails. It is more of a word game or an argument from ignorance than a sound argument. It confuses causality and predictability. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle does not prove that the movement of electrons is uncaused. It only describes the inability of observers to predict their location and speed at any given time. The mere fact that we can't predict something does not mean that something has no cause. The second approach of the atheist apologist is to undermine premise 2. The universe began to exist. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in 1970, mathematician Roger Penrose and Stephen Hawking proved that space-time had an absolute beginning to 5 decimal places. When we say the universe had a beginning, this includes time itself. Time is the 4th dimension, which is why physicists speak in terms of the fabric of space-time. This sort of irrefutable mathematical evidence leaves the atheist in a very uncomfortable position. Quite frankly, it threatens their faith in atheism. Now, I might be accused of taking Hawking out of context when I quoted him earlier from his book A Brief History of Time, saying that it became more and more clear that the universe must have a beginning in time, because Hawking now attempts to distance himself from that conclusion. I didn't bother to address it earlier because I was discussing scientific evidence. His recent attempts are not scientific, but philosophical. Fortunately, true science is not governed by the emotional whims of atheists. A cause by definition precedes an effect. The cause of time is by definition supernatural and beyond the grasp of science. The best scientific answer is we don't know. The best logical inference is God. To avoid this, Hawking invented a concept he calls imaginary time. Yes, you heard me correctly, imaginary time. This is because he knows and admits that it is a fact that real time had a beginning. So, in an attempt to explain away the beginning, one must leave real time in favor of imaginary time. Now, if one is willing to leave reality behind for the land of imagination, I suppose any theory you want to assert can be true. We might as well call Hawking's theories based on imaginary time bedtime stories for atheists. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. Does this verse hold up to examination? It absolutely does. And the words of today's top atheist scientists reveal it. Anthony Flew, the celebrated philosopher and former high priest of atheism, spectacularly changed his mind and shocked the world by renouncing his atheism. He said, "The argument for intelligent design is enormously stronger than when I first met it. It seems to me that the case for an Aristotelian God who has the characteristics of power and also intelligence is now much stronger than it ever was before. A change of mind which occurred because he followed the scientific evidence where it led him."